We're doing summer lecture series of 2019 called the Russian Pogroms of 1881, Harbinger of Extermination or Blessing in Disguise. I think you're starting to see where I'm going with that. Tonight is the third lecture entitled The Pogroms of 1881. And without any further ado, here we go. I left off last time, last two talks were like to set everything up. The build up to 1881, when the Czar is killed. So, if we look back now at the 25, 26 years of the reign of this Czar, Alexander II, I spoke about a great deal. So you can see, this is very fascinating, and there are many books on this now. There's a lot of healthy political discourse and a lot of unhealthy political discourse. And his reign, for students of Russian history, is very famous for that. And Russia, to this day, is kind of torn between healthy political discourse and unhealthy political discourse. In fact, they had some kind of riots or something in Moscow the other day. They don't like it, you know. On one hand, they kind of have a republic. On the other hand, you kind of don't have a republic. It's a battle. And let me put it this way. During the reign of Nikolai I, there was no political discourse. Okay? There was none. So in the reign of Alexander II, there was healthy and unhealthy. Now, the healthy one was let's go back. Was consisting of people like General Loris Melnikov, who was a famous general. That's his last name. Loris Melnikov, Armenian by background, who was a general. Look at him. And therefore he was a conservative. But he already said like this, you know, we can't stand still. We have to make some move, even a tiny bit, towards democracy. I don't mean democracy, God forbid, a little bit. You know what I'm saying? A little bit. Give the people a chance to vote for somebody at the local level, for dog catch or whatever. And, you know, maybe, and just, and send suggestions to the Czar. Nothing hard and fast. Believe me, he wasn't talking about going swimming. He was talking about stepping a half an inch towards the pool. Okay? That made him a left-wing radical in the government in the time of Alexander II. Although the Tsar made him, at the end of his life, he was the prime minister. Very interesting. When Alexander is assassinated, which is happening very soon, in the beginning of 1881, he's the prime minister, and he was already preparing a constitution. Nowhere near like what you and I consider a constitution. By the standards of Tsarist Russia, you know, a constitution. The right to burp, you know, very little, okay? But what does that mean? There were people like him who wrote newspaper articles and published, thoughtful intellectuals, not wild and crazy people, professors, lawyers, members of the, what shall I say, the professional classes, college, you know, people like that, who wrote without intending to cause any trouble whatsoever, how about changing this? And how about having a little more representation of this? Or how about, you know, look at England, look at France. We don't think exactly like them, of course, yeah, but a little bit. And to give the people just a little chance to express themselves, and maybe that will help governing the process. Because when you have an autocracy, a dictatorship, when something goes wrong, nobody can tell you anything's going wrong. So we want to do it for your help, not because we want to undermine the power of the Tsar. So you could write like that. This was not suppressed during the reign of Alexander II. And as I said before, for those who are interested in this sort of thing, if you're a Russian history specialist, they love this stuff because 1850s, 60s, 70s, all kind of ideas are churning out there in the middle class and upper middle class journals. Okay? I mean, it's out of this kind of discourse that you got the emancipation of the serfs. To give you an example, right? It's out of this kind of discourse that they got the changing of the courts into a real court system. You know, the few changes that actually happened came from this. So you understand what I'm saying? It's not a revolutionary kind of thing. It's the opposite. It's members of the establishment class saying, let's do a little bit of change. On the other hand, you also had unhealthy political discourse during the reign of Alexander II, because that's when you get the rise of terrorism. That's when it starts. Okay? You couldn't have that under Nicholas I because nobody could breathe. And as long as you keep, just like there was no terrorism under Stalin, the terrorists were in charge. There's no terrorism under Stalin. Nobody could form a group. You know what I'm saying? As soon as you and I are talking, one of us is going to tell each other, and probably both. That's just how it goes. No, I'm serious. That's how it went. He had it down to a science. So Nikolai I, not like Stalin, but somewhat similar, there was no political discourse. But then you could talk. But the system won't really change. They talk, and nothing happens. Or it's a snail's pace. And so some people say like this, takes a little bit longer. Russia's backwards. We're dealing with it. No, I'm serious. I'm telling you. We're not England. England could do it in 10 minutes. It'll take us 10 years, 20 years, but we'll get there. After all, they did free the slaves. You see? Took a long time. Did free the slaves. It can happen like that. But then there are people like this. It's stalling, it'll never change. There's an extreme right-wing element in the government that's opposed to any change and wants to take it farther to the right. And therefore, the hell with everything, let's blow them up and kill and destroy. And this is called nihilism, or as we would call today, terrorism. And it's during the reign of Alexander II that there arises the modern phenomenon of terrorism, which plagues the world down till today. Because they started in Russia, but it's picked up elsewhere around the world, because it was found useful for different causes. The Irish had it, the Irgun had it, for example. The Mau Mau had it off the top of my head in Africa, and in many other places. And you still got it today, and the Muslim terrorists are doing that also. So the modern concept of terrorism, the theory of terrorism, the theories of terrorism, go back to Russia in the 19th century. Anybody who takes a college course in terrorism, they're going to start you back with Russia. Not in the 18th century, and not in the 17th century, but in the 19th century, and not in England, and not in France, but in Russia. Okay? And you end up with people like this, Sergei Nechayev, who writes his book, The Revolutionists, is a doomed man. He has no private interests, no affairs, no sentiments, ties, property, or even a name of his own. His entire being, his Machias, as we would say, is devoured by one purpose, revolution. Heart and soul, not merely by word, but by deed. He has severed every link with the social order and with the entire civilized world, the laws, good manners, conventions, and morality of that world. He's a merciless enemy and will continue to inhabit with one purpose, to destroy the world. And that's Lenin, isn't it? Notice, the origins of what you and I call the communist terror state come from the reign of Alexander II, from the unhealthy political discourse. Okay? Now, you have to understand, the reluctant and slow pace of political progress, and it was very slow. Every proposal had to go through 1,000 commissions, and the emperor usually said, nah, and if they did, they'd put 1,000 qualifications. The reluctant and slow pace of political progress frustrates many and leads them to revolutionary activity. The slow pace was the great error of the reign of Alexander II. So it's not just, being cautious, such a thing being too cautious, and therefore he goes down in history as too slow, too reluctant, too little, and too late. Because it killed him. Such was the nature of the regime, of the bureaucratic absolutist state, as I always call it. Bureaucratic absolutist state and system that the Czars had erected. So they caused their own trouble by setting up something that they thought ensured them against any dangerous move. That itself was the most dangerous move. You see? The inability to change turned out to be their nemesis. Now, they weren't used to that. You see, if it's a regime of bullies, if you're dealing with a bunch of people like the Jews who are totally helpless, you can screw around with them forever. You can make whatever laws and take them back and mess them over. They're helpless. You understand? You can put a red tape and a bunch of baloney, because what are you dealing with? He's got all the power, and these are the Jews. Right? So you're used to that. But you try that on the non-Jews. That's a different world. They will respond by making your life a hell, Mr. Czar. Specifically, one group will come up with the goal to devote Yomam V'Layla to kill the Czar. That's the ultimate terrorism. Makes sense, right? Target the Czar for assassination, and it's ingenious because you've got 1 million policemen and detectives and army types, but you're the hunted and we're the hunters. See, you like to play the game your way, like with the Jews. You're the victim, and I'm the victimizer. But these people are not Jewish. They don't know from that stuff. You say, I'm the victim? Watch this. You'll be the victim. Because you'll be surrounded by everybody. I can still shoot you sooner or later. And so what does that mean? The old line, you have 1,000 Secret Service men around you, but you're scared to death. Who is it? Plato asked about Dionysus of Syracuse, remember this? Who was the tyrant of Syracuse way back when. And he was surrounded by bodyguards, and at nighttime, he doesn't even trust the bodyguards. He has one of these things where you pull the roof down, and climb up, then bring it up, and you sleep that way with 2 knives around him. And as Plato says, when he's asleep, is Dionysus the tyrant of Syracuse? So this is what happened. Now, specifically, Now, I want to be clear about this. There never were any assassination attempts against Peter the Great, or Elizabeth, or Catherine the Great, or Alexander the First, or Nicholas the First. This is not the Russian tradition. Matter of fact, the Tsars used to walk around the street like you and I. A lot of European rulers, the Emperor of Austria also. It's funny, they're without bodyguards. Okay? You can read the diaries of John Quincy Adams, who was the United States ambassador, minister to Russia in the early 1800s. He used to go walking together Stamazay with the Tsar all the time just to shoot the bull. No bodyguards, no nothing. So, not now. Now when you get to this, there are 5 assassination attempts on Alexander II. And they all came close. One time they put a bomb under a train, but the train missed it. The best one is what they call the Ant Anzina thing, because I don't know how they did it, but they got into the palace, under the main room, and they put a ton of dynamite over there, and they set off a fuse. And it's supposed to be when everybody's sitting down to dinner, but the aunt was late, fixing her earrings or something like this. And they're all saying, oh, she's taking forever, this and that, or she's an old witch. What's wrong with her? She's over the hill, saved her life. Because while she's doing like this, kaboom. You understand? So it means they could even penetrate the imperial palace throughout all the secret police and the Cossacks and all the rest of it. That's the power of terrorism. They can strike terror into you. Because every president of the United States knows, and every leader of the world knows, you got a perfect system. There ain't no perfect system, correct? There is no perfect system. The Secret Service can only do the best they can and hope. Right? Even big dictators sometimes get killed. Do you remember Indira Gandhi got shot by who? Yeah, Secret Service. Right? I'm just telling you, you don't know. So it puts in the terror in there. The best one is what I call Jack B. Nimble, Jack B. Quick. On the morning of 20th April, Alexander the Czar was briskly walking in the square of the guard staff, meaning a big open area in St. Petersburg, and he came across a guy, Alexander Soloviev, who's a 33-year-old former student. He saw the guy had a revolver in his hands. He started running away, and the guy was shooting at him, and he's zigzagging. The Tsar was clever enough, or athletic enough to go this way and that way, and finally, they missed. And then they caught the guy and hanged him. Well, let's put it this way. Maybe you ought to take up something besides jogging. It's not necessarily a good idea. You see that? And by the way, who is the assassin? A former student, meaning not a peasant or a low-life individual. An alienated member of the upper class. They're the ones who cause the trouble. Alienated members of the upper class. So, the Secret Service told the Tsar, listen, you just got to live with the reality. You can't move without being covered 24/7, you and your whole family. When you go to the bathroom, you have to have a guard in front of the bathroom. It's just, you got to get used to it. And he couldn't take it. As many heads of state cannot take it, right? Many presidents, if you know the history of the presidency, cheat the Secret Service, which is kind of dumb, but they do it. Kennedy comes to mind, for certain reasons. Now, but nevertheless, it's a messias. Well, it's very dangerous. If you can't, what shall I say? You can't depend on the Secret Service until you listen to them. You got to listen to them. If they tell you go here, don't go here, this, that, and the other, you got to listen to them. Well, the Tsar wouldn't exactly do it. It was dumb, but it's understandable. He wanted to have a life. On the other hand, the Tsar certainly was freaked out by these constant attempts on his life. Nobody wants to be a target of somebody else's gun. These attempts, plus the proliferation of similar groups, not minority groups. These are not Polish terrorist groups, Lithuanian terrorist groups, the Jewish terrorist groups. They're Russian. They're his own people. Right? His own people are angry at him. Moved the Tsar slowly to at least consider some steps towards representative government. This is why, at the end, he appointed this Lord Smelikov guy. Let's go. To the next one. Yeah. That's why he appointed this liberal prime minister at the end of his life. Because he said, and it was, like I said before, it wasn't really liberal, but it was, by his standards, the glacier was moving a little bit. Because he said, something has to be done. Cannot go on this way. Can't go on this way. He wasn't ready then, as many aren't, make a radical change, but he kind of saw. Now, we'll never know, okay? But he saw. And at the same time, in the Russian government, the high officials, there was a very strong reactionary right-wing party opposed to the slightest concessions to democracy and human rights. So the Tsar is always being pulled in two directions, and his natural tendencies go to the right. Now, would Alexander have made democratic reforms as his years went by in order to intelligently battle terrorism? As they say in the Gemara, we will never know. Take over, right? Because he got killed. Now, the way they killed him was by understandable stupidity on his own part. You'll see in a second in the movie. He was, first of all, he made the mistake of traveling the same way every day. Okay? That's right. Stalin used a different car every day and went a different route. Okay? Because Stalin knew the history of Russia. Even though there wasn't the slightest chance of anybody doing anything. But I'll tell you again, the Tsar went every day the same route. And he drove back on a bulletproof coach over a certain bridge. And the terrorists were standing there, and one threw the bomb like that, and it blew up. It missed the bulletproof thing. It hurt one of the guards. His soldiers said, "Yes, keep going weiter, go, go, go," which is what you're supposed to do in that kind of situation. From a Secret Service perspective, right? If, God forbid, there's any kind of trouble, you move the president. Instead, he said, "No, I want to see what happened to the guard." Oh, when he went to the guard, the other guy threw a thing at him. And by the way, there was a third one waiting if the second one hadn't worked. So look at this. Here's a Russian movie. Here's the Tsar's thing. Here's the assassin. It blew up over there, but it didn't hurt the Tsar. Hurt one of the Cossacks. He gets out of the coach, which is a mistake. Here is Alexander II. All right, new. Here he is. And the soldiers saying, "Go, go, go. Don't stand here." And of course, he's a religious guy trying to cross. And they're saying, "Get out of here, get out of here." And they say, "We caught the assassin." And he's going over to give Musser to the assassin. Right? This is stupid, yeah? Here's the Tsar. And he's saying, "What did you do?" What's he doing? He's giving chance for the other guy. Right? And he's talking back to him. No, you naughty boy. Now, wait a second. Here is the second guy. Now, what does he do? He sends Shalach. Quickly, don't thank your God. Boom. There you go. So, he died because he didn't act right. Now, the point I want to make, that movie's not 100% accurate. There was no girl standing there, and I'll tell you the reason I say that. Right? It's funny the Russians made the movie that way, but it doesn't surprise me at all. Here's the killers. Let's go to the next one. There's 9 people. Not Jewish, 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 Jewish, not Jewish. Kasi Hoffman, right? All the others not Jewish. Who killed the Tsar? The Jews. After all, one of them Jews. You get what I'm saying? I just want you to understand what we're dealing with, okay? Right? So, and go explain to the peasants that, well, it's 1 out of 9, and they don't want to hear that. Now, the death of the Tsar put the new boy in the throne. And now the Jews have to deal with, the next slide, the son of Alexander II, Alexander III, who was a throwback to Nicholas. You know, he thought his father was way too liberal. That's who he was. And I can even go more than that. On many levels, he didn't like his father. He was a big, strong guy and that sort of thing. And he wasn't the smartest guy, but he wasn't a dummy either. He was not a dummy. And Alexander II had an unhappy marriage. So he had like 5 or 8 children with his wife, but then he had a mistress on the side, and the kids could never... And he was really in love with her. And when the wife died of cancer, he married the mistress right away, like a day later. And so, it's a good movie, you know. There are many movies in German, not in English, on this subject. for your information. Many famous German movies on this. And because he met the mistress that morning before he got done, and they were on their way back to have lunch, it's good material. Anyway, the children didn't like the father, which you could totally understand. Makes sense. So therefore, not only didn't they like the father's personal lifestyle, but if the father was liberal, you get what I'm saying? Now, who cares if you're one of 3-4 million Jews in Russia? Unfortunately, you care. This affects you. This is the way it goes. Now, the first thing the new Czar said was like this: we're going back to Nicholas I, and everything my father did was wrong, or most of the things he did was wrong, and this proves it. Okay? This proves it, because he tried to be a little open, and they killed him. So this proves it. Moreover, his Rebbe, or tutor, when he was growing up, was a very famous Russian law professor, who he now named as the Secretary of State for Church Affairs. Because in Russia, ever since Peter the Great, it's not the Catholic Church. The Russian Orthodox Church works for the government. Many people don't understand that. There was a long time ago that it wasn't that way. But ever since Peter the Great, he put the church totally under the power of the government. Let's put it this way: they can tell the police what the confessions are. I'm just telling you. This is how it goes. It's not the Catholic Church. It's a different culture. The Catholic Church is bigger than any individual country. In Russia, that's not the case. There's just the Russian Orthodox Church under the Tsar. So, just like there's the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Treasury, there's the Secretary for Christianity. And his job is to run the church. And the guy he put in charge was Konstantin Pogroms. I know it's an easy name to pronounce. Who was what is called the Oberprocurator for the Russian Orthodox Church. And he will be the Baal Hashkafa for the next 20 years. He will lay down the ideology for government policies and being tremendously influential, because he was the high school Rebbe, as we would say today, of the Tsar. So therefore, he was very much under his sway. And anyway, he was a bad guy. Alexander was predisposed to be this way anyway. And so the result is, you had a terrible situation about to happen. Okay? Now, Pogroms was a honest, extreme right-wing conservative. He wasn't a cynical person or anything like that. He honestly, like we would say today, he really believes in the John Birch Society. It's not a fake. That's who he was. And therefore, how do the Jews fit into it? Well, the Jews don't fit into Russia. Okay? Nor does any liberalism whatsoever. Because he is the representative of a very famous strain that's just going on in Putin right now. And that's what they call a Sonderweg, a different road. This is why Putin is opposed to the homosexuality. That's why he's opposed to all the liberal things. Because he's like, that's Western. You understand? It's not true to the Russian character. We have a different development. Okay? And the Russian soul, the Russian character responds to this and not to that. Maybe it works in the West. We don't even agree it works in the West. Therefore, we think America is a decadent country and all that sort of thing. Right? They do. This guy is like one of the avi-avos of that kind of approach, of that kind of shita. So, as I said before, Russia is obviously a Christian country, a Russian Orthodox country. It's not really room for Catholics here. There's not room for Protestants. And there sure as heck is not room for Jews. And by the way, they never did let Jews into Russia proper. Remember? So he's not coming up with this on his own. And he would say like this: it's a mistake even to have them in the Pale Settlement. I just don't know what to do with them. And like Alexander III said, if it were only possible to push them all to the Black Sea, but it isn't. So at the end of the day, he's not Hitler. He's not. Okay? So put that aside. But he's pretty bad. And this is a ruler. So in Russia, we have a case where the government is against the people if you're Jewish. We're not used to thinking like this, okay? Usually, the government kind of like tries to work with the population. Here, the government, under these kind of thinkings, is against you. So instead of interpreting the assassination of the Tsar that he hadn't been liberal enough, if it only been a constitution 10 years earlier or something like that, that would have taken a lot of fire away from the terrorism. Instead, Pogroms argued that it indicated the Tsar had been too liberal. And so, as I said before, since he was his Rebbe, since he was his tutor growing up, and by the way, he was a distinguished law professor. He's not an idiot at all. Not that anybody has to know Russian classic law, but I mean, Pogroms is like a sort of an Oliver Wendell Holmes type in Russian law. Now, anyhow, so Russia turned sharply to the right, and they would remain so till the rest of the reign of Alexander III, shortly to the right. In other words, the government would be anti-Semitic openly and as a matter of principle. They wouldn't hide the fact that they're anti-Semitic. They say, we don't like the Jews. We're stuck with them. Can't kill them. We acknowledge that. You see? But we got to figure something to do about it because they represent a cancer in the country and we just don't know what to do. That's what the government says in its official pronouncements. Just want to be clear about that, okay? So keep this in mind for the rest of tonight. Now, Alexander II was killed on March 1st of 1881, March 1. 8 weeks later, Alexander III, his son, issued his inaugural address to the nation, what he calls the Imperial Manifesto, and announcing a turn to the right, and especially, he says, I want to be very clear over here, no democracy, full autocracy. Autocracy means dictatorship. And so the base and wicked murder of a Russian sovereign by unworthy monsters from the people, done in the very midst of that faithful people, meaning religious Christian people. By the way, there's a gigantic church on that site today where Alexander was killed. I forget what they call it. So it's a huge church in St. Petersburg. Who were ready to lay down their lives for him. This is a terrible and shameful matter unheard of in Russia, which has darkened our land with grief and terror. But in the midst of our grief, the voice of God orders me, when he says us, it's me. Voice of God orders me courageously to undertake, in deference to divine intention, the task of ruling with faith in the strength and rightness of autocratic power. So what does all that mean? He said, no democracy, no parliament, no nothing, because God has told me not to do it. God has told me not to do it. Okay? We are summoned, meaning I am summoned, to reaffirm that power, meaning autocracy, and preserve it for the benefit of people from any encroachment. So I'm trying to tell you, this is not a cynical defense of dictatorship. This is a principled defense of dictatorship. Okay? Courage to the hearts, now overcome by terror, confusion and terror, of a faithful subject who love the fatherland and have from generation to generation been devoted to the hereditary Tsarist power, under its shelter, meaning under pure dictatorship, as has always been the case in Russia, and in unbroken union with it, my land, has more than once experienced great tumults and passed with faith in God through grievous experience of misfortunes, new power and glory. So dedicating ourselves to our great service, meaning me, I appeal to our subjects to serve us in the state faithfully so that the foul treason which shames Russian land may uprooted and morality reinforced and blah, blah, blah. So basically he was giving a notice. This is his inaugural address. Okay? His inaugural address says, forget about it. You know what I'm saying? If you're looking for change, move somewhere else. Okay? Because God has spoken to me. That's the basis for what they call divine right of kings. And it's the basis of a certain type of dictatorship. You know, Hitler will not say God put it in my hand because he's atheist. So he's different language. A Stalin will do the same thing. But a Czar, who's grounded in Christianity, by the way, a church that he controls, which therefore says what he wanted to say, and what it says is that he should be the ruler, you know. But nevertheless, a Czar will always say, this is a part of religion. This is part of religion. So here you have it. The first decree issued therefore by the new government is the police are above the law. And that remains the rule until 1917, until the overthrow. To be perfectly honest, it remained the rule until 1990, correct? Because the communists kept that. The police are above the law. No such thing as Miranda rights or habeas corpus where you have to explain anything, you know. If they catch the wrong guy, and if it comes out later in court something that they caught the wrong guy, no apologies, you know, that's it. If they say we caught the wrong guy but we want to send you Siberia anyway, you can do that too. So there are laws, but let me be clear about this, because in many systems of law we have this, including Jewish law. Law and order is there for everyday activities. You want to buy a house, you and I have a quarrel, we have property disputes, 100 different marriage and divorce. That's for regular courts. You get involved in politics, then you deal with the police. You deal with the police, all that's over. You get it? So that's the first rule, okay? So what do you see all of a sudden happening now? There's a new regime and a new direction. The press, the Russian right-wing press, which was big under Alexander II. You also had a left-wing press. We had a big right-wing press. They start to publish articles. And these are magazines. They're not the New York Times, but they're big, okay? They say, I'm reading what it says. We wouldn't really be surprised if pogroms break out around Easter time. After all, the Russian people do want revenge for the assassination of the Czar. So the reputable newspapers, right wing, but not reputable newspapers, are basically saying, gee, if something happens over here, it wouldn't surprise me in the least. Well, what is that? What is that? Now, which area in the Russian Empire was the most prone to have pogroms? Not Russia proper, because there were never any Jews there. Russia doesn't have any history. There are no pogroms in history of Siberia. There are no pogroms in history of Moscow. There were no Jews. Okay, so where would it be? Well, a Pale settlement. Not Poland and Lithuania. We did that last year. Let's go to the next one. Do you remember what we did last year? In the old kingdom of Poland, where the Jews belonged to the nobles, they were therefore physically safe. The Jew makes a deal with the nobleman. Maybe he runs the bar. Maybe he has something like that. And, it's a better situation, worse situation. But you're not bothered by anybody because the Shlachta will beat him up. So there's no tradition of anti-Jew violence, contrary to popular belief, in many of these areas of Eastern Europe. So where are you going to find this? Well, the answer is Ukraine. Okay? Let's go to the next one. Remember Khmelnytsky? The Cossack uprisings in 1640-49? We talked about it long ago. That's the eastern part of the old kingdom of Poland, or now the southern Ukraine and Russia. That's part of the Pale settlement. They got a long history of savage behavior. Stalin developed around for everybody, and particularly for Jews, but not only for Jews. Okay, not only for Jews. As a matter of fact, the Ukrainians so far have a following scorecard, at least in my calculation. One Jewish massacre, big set of Jewish massacres per century. Okay? Look at the next line. You got the Khmelnytsky massacres of the 1600s, the Gzeres Tachvatat. You got what they call the Heidemark massacres of 1768, in which they wiped out whole towns, including Uman. That's why, what's his name was buried there? What am I thinking of? Nachum Breslover. He said he wanted to be buried near the victims, not of Khmelnytsky, but of 1768, when there was people don't, that's the other Khmelnytsky thing. People don't know about that. Maybe we'll do that one year. And it was the Polish nobles that crushed it, okay, not the Jews. Then you got the pogroms of 1881 that we're about to see. And then, of course, not long ago we did the First World War. I spoke about this a month ago, I think. And the Ukraine killed 100,000 Jews. 100,000 Jews butchered in 1920. Okay? So that's one per century. Now we're in the 21st century. Achavei. Now, fortunately, today got Israel. The Jews, most of them got out of Ukraine. Some dummies still stay in Ukraine. It's a funny, Now, until now, when you're stuck there, you're stuck there. I get that. In the Soviet Union, you're stuck there. But it's a volcano, right? Sooner or later. But who are the instigators? That's a difficult question to answer. Not the local police officials. If you study the records, it's not that in this town the police say, okay, you want to do a pogrom now? Wink, wink, wink. It doesn't go like that. Not at first anyway. When the outbreaks will begin, a month after the death of the Tsar in April, the local police guys will be taken by surprise. It reminds you a little bit like some of these lynching situations used to happen in the South, where just it blew up out of someone. The local sheriff the instigator wasn't even ready for it. On the other hand, immediately upon the assassination of the emperor, a bunch of young right-wingers formed a secret organization called the Holy League to use terrorism against terrorists and against others. Okay, so one of the most famous Russian statesmen was Sergei Vita, who ended up marrying a former Jew. And he was a young guy in 1881. And he and the other guys formed like we would say, what's the right word? A KKK, against the KKK or something like that. It's a right-wing terror organization against what they perceive as the other ones. So there used to be suspicion that these guys ran around and fomented the pogroms. We'll never know 100% for sure. What we do know is that stuff happened in a certain place called Elizabethgrad, which was in the southern part of the Pale settlement. So here's where the Jews live in Russia. Remember, they're not allowed to live here, right? They're not allowed to live here. So this is the area, and there's Elizabethgrad. Right? So that's in the Katerinoslav gubernia, whatever. It's in the southeast part. Basically, Ukraine. Okay? Now, what do we know happens? They have to pay close attention. In the preceding week, because it happened on Isru Chag of Easter, the day after Easter. Preceding week, the Jews start to hear rumors. They report them to the cops. The understaffed police, how big is the police force in Elizabethgrad? It's not a place that usually has riots. A police force is there for, to collect the drunks and all that, The understaffed police called the army. So they did everything right. And they brought in a garrison of soldiers to walk through the streets. Nothing happens. Then the army leaves. As soon as the army leaves, a guy walks into a Jewish saloon, ostentatiously makes trouble. The Jewish bartender give him the bum's rush. Throw on the street, which happens all the time, every day, everywhere, in every bar that ever existed. But this was planned. As soon as they see the guys throw it out, the cry runs up through the city. The Jews are beating up the Christians. Death to the Jews. Which means the guy walked in as part of a plot. You understand? And here, let's read the police report. I think this is a police report. During the night from the 15th, 16th of April, an attack was made on Jewish houses, primarily liquor stores. So it's like Baltimore, okay? It's like D.C. Liquor stores on the outskirts of town, on which occasion one Jew was killed. After 7 in the morning, April 18th, the excesses were renewed, spreading with extraordinary violence all over the city. Now in Russia, when they say extraordinary violence, and the Ukraine with extraordinary violence, clerks, saloon and hotel waiters, artisans, drivers, flunkies, day laborers and employees of the government, and soldiers on furlough, all these joined the movement. So it wasn't like you say, the lowest, a bunch of drunks or something like that. People. Okay? The city proved an extraordinary sight. Streets were covered with feathers and obstructed with broken furniture and thrown out the residences. Houses with broken doors and windows. A raging mob running around yelling and whistling in all directions and continuing its work of destruction without let or hindrance. And as a finishing touch to this picture, complete indifference shown by the local non-Jewish inhabitants to the havoc wrought in front of their eyes. Because they're not out to get me. They're not going to hurt me? Okay. The troops, which have been summoned to restore order without definite instructions, so that was the problem. They had no, what do you call, rules of engagement. And soldiers are, used to following specific orders. And nobody expected this exactly to happen. So without definite instructions, each attack on the mob on another house would wait for orders of the military police authorities without knowing what to do. As a result of this attitude of the military, the mob, the turbulent mob, which was demolishing the houses and stores of the Jews before the eyes of the troops without being checked by them, was bound to arrive at the conclusion that it's okay, it's not an illegal undertaking, but rather was a work which had the approval of the government. Because in Russia, if they want to stop something, they stop it. So if they're not stopping it, they don't assign it, as we would today, to confusion, lack of orders, no definite rules of engagement, all that kind of stuff. What they mean is like this. The government wants it. You see? Towards evening, the disorders increased in intensity owing to the arrival of a large number of peasants from the adjacent villages who were anxious to secure part of the loot. So here comes a big part of the pogroms everywhere in riots. Word of mouth. Big mouth. Telegraph. Right? Everybody tells everybody else. So you hear all kind of junk. All the farmers nearby say like this. You can get a TV set. You get air conditioner. To use Baltimore example, right? So it's got nothing to do anymore with, principals killed the Czar, all the rest of it. I want a TV. Or in the 1800s, I want a table, something like that, right? And so it's plain and simple plunder. You get it? There was no one to check these crowds. The police and troops were helpless. They had all lost heart and were convinced it was impossible to suppress the order with the means at hand. At 8 at night, a rain came down, accompanied by wind, and that helped in large measure to disperse the crowd. Okay? If only earlier. At 11, fresh troops arrived. On the morning of 17th, a new battalion of infantry came, and then public order was no longer violated because it got to be clear that now there are going to be orders, to shoot or something like that. So what I just described to you is the first of many, 50, 60, 70 times all across that area, in one village after another, in which the identical scene happens. There's cops there, there's this, but nobody knows exactly what to do. The government at the top gave no orders whatsoever, and the crowd says if they're not shooting us, that means that it's okay, and the result is a reign of terror across the southern part of the PLO settlement. This is a police report, or a nice report. They leave out the murders, especially the rape. The rape is the big feature of the pogroms. Okay, it's a Russian thing. I don't know what it is. Remember, they went to Germany out in '45 and they raped everybody. It's a thing with them. So it's a terrible. It just happens everywhere. What happens to the perpetrators after it's all over? Rap on the knuckles. Okay, I mean the killers, the plunderers, the rapists, not really arrested. And they'll tell you know how they do with the rape victims. Are you sure it was him and all the rest of it? If the Jewish girl, she probably doesn't even want to get involved in the whole process. Correct? Meaning, as we know, unfortunately, when it comes to rape, the victim is a total victim, but feels like they're not a victim, and they just want to move on and not discuss it anymore and things like this. And just multiply this thousands of times across the southern part of the Pale in 1881, and you start to get an idea of what we're talking about. Okay? Rumors then start to fly throughout the southwest provinces, meaning a little bit to the right, to the left of what I showed you before, over here, this area. It started here, it's moving there. It's not up here, but it's all around here, all right? So rumors start to fly. The cops aren't doing anything. As you can see, went to the Kherson and Katerinoslav, there's that and that. Now, the Jewish public and liberals in Russia in general are convinced the government planned the whole thing. Because the soldiers aren't doing anything, there's no real punishment, people heard about it beforehand, nothing happens in Russia by accident, therefore it must be deliberate. Actually, things do happen in Russia by accident. This was not planned. It wasn't part of a huge plot or something like that. It just happened. The government was not on their toes, and they weren't comfortable with defending Jews against Christians. They would have rushed like crazy if it were the other way around. They're not comfortable defending Jews against Christians. That's just a culture. Okay? At first, the Czar, Alexander III and Puppet Nostev, upon hearing about this, they believe and fear it's the revolutionaries who started it. Because the revolutionaries want to get the mobs used to breaking the law, and then, look how clever, this is what the Tsar thinks, look how clever they are. First you direct it against the Jews, and then once everybody's all heated up, then you go against the Tsar. That's how they saw it. Because naturally, they immediately worry about their own rear end. In other words, the revolutionaries and terrorists, they thought, are cleverly taking advantage of the always latent anti-Semitism of the masses to start lawlessness. Once the lawlessness gets widespread, the terrorists will turn upon the authority. And that's why, at the beginning, when Alexander III and the others heard that they were going around and rioting and killing the Jews and all the rest of it, not listening to police, he got plenty scared. Not because he could give a darn about the Jews, but because he said, wait a minute, who's behind this move to break the law? To break the law. The main thing in an autocracy is the law, which is my will. The law is always dominant, you see? But as time goes on, it becomes clear to the government that this is just stam anti-Semitism. Once that becomes clear, the Tsar and Pavnostov, like they say in the Gemara, Nichalu, they're okay with it. I mean, I can understand why they blew up all the liquor stores. The Jews are always getting the peasants drunk. They're overcharging them. Everybody knows the Jews are rip-off artists. They're stealing right and left. They're buying up the land. Naturally they want it. That's how they feel about it, okay? Although the Tsar very reluctantly does acknowledge, very reluctantly, his responsibility to maintain law, order, life, and property, it is obvious that he does so reluctantly. For the Hamon Am of Russia, for the masses, it is a signal, as we say in the Gemara, Hutra Ritzua, that, the permission is given to break the law. There will generally be no bad consequences for the rioters, looters, killers, and rapists, and that's what happens in 1881-82. People just get away with it, and that's what happened in the later pogroms in Russia. People just get away with it. Now, under the influence of everything we've been talking about, the Tsar takes the line, and so does the Russian government, and therefore all the newspapers. Everything just happens as the fault of the Jews. They're the ones, because if you didn't overcharge the peasants, this wouldn't happen. So in other words, you got killed, but it's your fault. That way. Now, by the way, it's wonderful. If you do that, then I don't really have to use the police. In other words, we didn't do anything bad that you brought upon yourself. It's always a nice way to look at it. But the Jews are exploiters, they're clannish, they cause drunkenness, and all the rest. It's the righteous, though excessive, reaction of the oppressed. It's understandable, though not permissible. In fact, it kind of reminds us of the riots in Baltimore City a couple of years ago. Right? Have the exact same thing. Let's go to the next one. What did Stephanie Blake say? She said, don't arrest anybody, don't cause any trouble, The boys will be boys. Let them go and cause trouble. It's understandable what all the newspapers say. Baltimore is misgoverned and the economy's no good. Trump wasn't around that time. It was Obama, so they blame it on something else. And I'm serious. You remember this, right? And the general idea was like this. Let him let out the steam, and then it'll go away. And it's not entirely incorrect, right? I mean, you can't say she was 100% wrong in that. But on the other hand, what kind of message does it send? This could happen tomorrow. So, I'm not saying that's definitely wrong is Alexander III, but there are disturbing parallels in terms of the action and the inaction of the authorities in breaking the law. Now, Baltimore didn't get anywhere near what I'm describing, right? You didn't have the personal violence that I said before, the mass rapes, the killings, the plunderings, and all that kind of stuff. It was a property thing. They broke police cars and things like that. So it's not the same. But on the other hand, this notion that the government's not doing its job, because the first job of any government is supposed to be law and order. It's supposed to be. Okay? But we live in a funny world today. In the process of executing law and order, you could provoke a bigger riot by shooting somebody. Right? We know this. In America, we certainly know it. You understand? If the police overreact, that itself is a problem. So it's strange. This is an existential issue that there's no answer for. We just constantly struggle with how to get it right. And we're constantly maneuvering back and forth in our society. Well, this is Russia long ago. Now, the riots spread. Mainly because of what I call the yakkers and the hackers and the cracker barrel conquistadors. Who's the one that carries out the pogroms? Unemployed vagrants who move from town to town. So as soon as you were in this town, boy, where were you yesterday, 2 days ago? I came from Elizabethgrad. Man, that was a party, right? We killed the Jews. I got 14 bottles of booze. Finish it off on the spot. My brother got 3 air conditioners. My sister got this, and that, and the other. And it was okay. Nothing happened to anything. The cops saw me do it. They told me to move on like a bad boy, and nothing happens. So you see, it spreads. Railroad workers, who are the anti-Semitic Paul Revere's, guys on trains, and trains move from place to place. Boy, we just went through a town, and my goodness, the place was smoking, half the town was burned down. It was the Jew part. You understand? And 15 women were raped by me, and nothing happened, and now I'm on the train again. You see how it goes? Okay? You got your shopkeepers, your butchers, your clerks, your tanners, your carpenters, your artisans, and finally your peasants. These are the ones who do the riots. And they all got friends and relatives, and one talks to the other, and so on and so on. It's not a kind of situation where somebody committed a terrible crime and goes home and doesn't talk about it. That's a certain model. Here, everybody's talking about it. I mean, seriously, what was going on, not to be over cynical about this, what's going on this Sunday in church following this in that town? Is everybody paying attention to the prayers? Or are they sharing war stories? Or better yet, are they sharing watches? Or ties? Or dresses? This is the real world, you see? Now, the riot spread. Here we have another pogrom. Take a look at this. At 12 o'clock at noon, the air suddenly resounded with wild shouts, whistling, jeering, hooting, and laughing. An immense crowd of young boys, artisans and laborers, were in the march. So just picture that. Walking through a town, a whole bunch of people coming down, as we would say today, Park Heights. The whole city was obstructed by the Barefoot Brigade. What does that mean? The vagrants and the peasants who were poor, and therefore you know what they're looking for. Okay? Now, the destruction of Jewish houses begins. Window panes and doors begin to fly about, and shortly thereafter the mob, having gained access to the houses and stores, because they break in, begin to throw upon the streets absolutely everything that fell in their hands. Right? Clouds of feathers whirl in the air. The din of broken window panes and frames, crying, shouting, despair on the one hand, meaning the Jews screaming, and it's yelling and jeering on the other hand. The crowd completed the picture, which reminded many of those who had participated in the last Russian-Turkish war of the manner in which the Bashi bazooks had attacked the Bulgarian villages. The famous Muslim terrorist group, the soldiers of the Ottoman Empire, went in when the Bulgarians rioted. They went in and they made a churban and a half of the Bulgarian towns, which led to the Russian-Turkish War. If you know anything at all about British history, which you don't, Gladstone wrote about the Turkish horrors, right, of 1877. It awoken the whole cry of the world. Well, this is happening in Russia all the time. Okay? Soon afterwards, the mob threw themselves on the synagogue, which despite the strong bars, locks, and shutters, was wrecked in a moment. One should have seen the fury in which the riffraff fell on the Sefer Torahs, of which there were many in the synagogue. The Torahs were torn to shreds, trampled in dirt, and destroyed with incredible passion. What does that mean? You know? So we're back to Khmelnytsky. He did this in 1648, if anybody recalls. Okay? So you see this idea of wanting to vent, in a physical, possible way, your utter hatred for everything Jewish. Okay? The streets were soon crammed with the trophies of destruction. Everywhere, fragments of dishes, furniture, household utensils, and other articles lay scattered about. 2 hours after beginning the pogrom, the majority of the Barefoot Brigade were transformed into well-dressed gentlemen. Because now I got a suit, you got a tie, this one has shoes. Right? Now they look great. Right? Many of them having grown excessively stout in the meantime. Meaning they're wearing 2, 3, 4. Listen, fortunately, I'm looking at a crowd, I trust, not of looters. Right? I could possibly, in Baltimore, be looking at a crowd of people who are looters. And they'll tell you, you don't just take one thing, you take a bunch. Okay? Now, the reason for this sudden change was similar. They had looted the stores of ready-made clothes, put on 3 or 4 suits, and not satisfied, took in their arms all they could lay their hands on. Others drove off in vehicles, meaning they took the wagons from the Jews, you understand? Carrying with them bags filled with loot, the Christian population saved themselves by putting holy crosses in the window and the gates of the house. Which I remember myself from the riots of 1968, when I lived in Forest Park, and I had a nice neighbor who said, if you want your house to be spared, put a black sock on the light in front of your house. It was that time, right? This is a culture of the riots. You understand? At Baltimore, Maryland, yes, that's right. You've heard of it. Now, what's the result? It gets worse and worse. Now, we're in the Ukraine over here. These reports that I'm giving to you are like official reports. They don't tell you the real story. The real story was 100 times worse. Okay? A couple years ago, like 2 years ago, the Poles made a movie, I think I tried to show it here once, of what they did to what the Ukrainians did to the Poles in Volhynia, in that part of Ukraine. This is a movie. It's not real. It's actors. They're taking kids and burning them alive and having fun while they're doing it. Now, I say again, it's not real. This is what they did to the Jews. But they don't want to talk about it in the official records. Right? And by the way, Poland only did it because they're looking at taking it. This is a Polish boy, and the Ukrainians are taking, this is 1943, by the way. Right? It's a Holocaust winning the Holocaust. That's right. Yeah, you don't know about it. It's a Holocaust winning the Holocaust, and she's watching it, and they look at that. Again, it's actors, so don't freak out. Right? But look at that. And they're having fun. And if this is what they're doing to fellow Christians, you understand what I'm talking about. Okay? I'm sparing you the audio, otherwise you're screaming. Okay? You see it? Now, this didn't happen so long ago. That happened in the Holocaust to Jews all the time. And it happened in 1881 all the time. Well, I don't say all the time, but I would imagine something like this happened about 100 times in the course of 1881 and 1882. This is my guess, about 100 times. Whatever happened to the people that did this? Or let me put it this way. In this incident that happened in World War II, not that I'm Polish, what happened to the Ukrainians that did this? The answer is nothing. Nothing. Okay? Just like what happened to most of the Nazis that ran the concentration camps, that kind of, what happened to them? The answer is nothing. Get used to it. This is how it goes. This is how it goes. So what happened to all the Russians that did all that kind of stuff, the Ukrainians in those years? Nothing. Okay? I want to be clear about that. Now, the right moves to Kiev, to the big city, capital of Ukraine. There's a large Jewish population. No longer talking about a whole string of small towns. Now you're talking about a big whole neighborhood. They have a whole, I forget what it's called. There used to be a big neighborhood in Kiev with like 60, 70,000 Jews. And the mob hits over there. Let's go to the next one. In some places, there were neither troops or police on the spot. The rioters were able to give full vent to their beastly instincts. In Demiovka, the suburb of Kiev, was invaded by a horde of rioters at night. They first destroyed the saloons, filled themselves with alcohol, and then proceeded to lay fire to the Jewish houses under cover of the night. Indescribable horrors were perpetrated. That's their euphemism, what I just showed you. Right? That's the euphemism, what I just showed you. Indescribable horrors. And numerous Jews were beaten to death, thrown into the flames, like I just showed you. and many women were violated. A private investigation carried out subsequently 20 cases of rape committed on Jewish girls and married women. Only 2 of the sufferers confessed to misfortune public prosecutors, meaning the women don't want to talk about it. Like I say, this is unfortunately a well-known feature, a very sad feature of the rape culture, which the victim, doesn't want to report it. The others admitted their disgrace in private or concealed it for fear of ruining their reputation. This 1800s. It's our bubbies. You understand it. That world, you couldn't even say the word, okay, in that old-fashioned culture. Let alone, so the horrors that they experience on a psychological level, beyond belief, correct? Beyond belief. Besides from it's bad business. Now, what happens? Rumors spread everywhere. Let's go to the next one. The Czar has issued a secret order to beat the Jews. I can't tell you how this spreads all across the thing. It's what we call today fake news, because it wasn't true. But on the other hand, it is true. What do I mean when I say it's not true? It is true. He never said a thing like that. But you know what I know. He didn't lose any sleep over it. Okay? Really, really, really? If you asked Alexander III, what do you think about beating the Jews? He'd go like this. Anybody looking? This is what I really good. Yeah. So there was more. It wasn't true, but there was a truth to it. Okay? Now, to be perfectly honest, many local Christian priests try to tell their flock that the Czar has issued no such orders, but they are not believed. And so it happens, right? Let's go to the next one. Look at this. In one village, a Jewish woman of 30 was attacked and tortured to death. The 7-year-old son of another woman who had saved herself by violence. So the mother ran away, and the 7-year-old kid was left behind, was killed in beastly fashion, like we saw in the movie, because he wouldn't make the sign of the cross. The 7-year-old. Okay? Now, that's why I'm doing this in 3 weeks, by the way. Now, that goes us through April, because Easter was in April. In early May, there's a riot that hits Odessa. But there's 100,000 Jews at that time. 100,000 Jews. They try to form a JDL, but they're arrested by the police. Welcome to Russia. Gun control. Like I say today, what are you doing with a gun? He said, well, they got a riot coming. What are you doing with a gun? Okay? And so the Jews are helpless to defend themselves. This is why a generation later, this is 1881, a generation later, a young Jew in Odessa will preach that every Jewish community has to have a JDL, Jabotinsky, who was born 1880, in Odessa. That's not a coincidental date, is it? What's the formative experience of baby years? See? Tried to get guns in it, the police wouldn't let it. Next time, the Jews have to do something. Now, you'd be surprised. At the headquarters of the Hasidim in Berdichev, they did form a JDL. And when the Russian rioters arrived in mass off a train, they were met at the train station, a couple hundred Jews with baseball bats, clubs. And they turned around and went home. Okay? Now, they got back on the train. How did this happen? They paid a big bribe to the local police commissioner, big bribe, and he let them defend themselves. And that police commissioner is called a tzaddik yisrael in the Jewish sources. Because in Russia, a tzaddik is a guy who allows himself to be bribed to allow you to get... And it is. You know, and all kidding aside, I know it's funny, all kidding aside, if you're in Tsarist Russia, that is a good person. Remember Abraham Lincoln said, what's an honest politician? You buy him, he stays bought. Right? So every culture has its own thing. What's an honest Russian policeman? He allows the Jew to defend himself. For a price, of course, because nothing is for free. You know, that goes without saying. After Odessa, in early May, there's a lull. And for May and June, there's no riots. At this point, the Czar summons a strong man to take over the very important, powerful position of Minister of the Interior, who's in charge of all the police and security forces throughout Russia, Count Nikolai Ignatiev, who's actually very famous. And if you want a prediction on my part, this guy's going to be the cause of the destruction of Russia, because as a result of what he did, remember where you heard this, as a result of what he did, there's going to be a big war between China and Russia one of these days, and China's going to wipe out Russia. Right? Because he was the Russian representative in the Far East. Nobody knows this. And he stole the maritime province where Vladivostok is from the Chinese. But we'll see if I'm right or wrong. Now, What does Count Ignatiev say? He's a Russian right-wing so-and-so. And so he said, look, the rioters are right. The rioters are right. We don't believe in breaking the law. We're not condoning violence, but they're right. And so the proper way to forestall future pogroms is to stick it to the Jews by law and separate them and take away. They can't have a liquor store anymore. They can't have this kind of business. They can't own land. They can't do this. And then there won't be any problem. So the way to solve the problem is hit the Jews. And then the public will see that the government is preventing the Jews from hurting anybody, and then there won't be any violence. And so as a result, this is May, right? I just told you March and then April, now it's May. They issue the May laws, right? It's under Alexander III. As a temporary measure, which never was revoked, is decreed all Jews be forbidden to settle outside towns and boroughs, exceptions only in case of agricultural colonies. Temporarily forbidden issuing of mortgages and other deeds to Jews, registration of Jews as lessees of real property outside of towns and boroughs, also issuing Jews the power of attorney to manage the disposal of real property. Jews are forbidden to transact business on Sunday and principal Christian yontivs, and existing regulations closing place of business on such days apply to Jews. You know, that's a double hit because the Jews have to close on Saturday. Okay? The blue laws. The measures laid down in paragraph 1, 2, and 3, applying to governments within the Pale of Settlement. Are there any more here? I say, okay. Now you'll see in a second. Meaning you begin to have a bunch of laws. And by the way, look at the language. It's Jew. I said before, don't give me this business of equal rights or anything like that. The law is based on your religion. Any Jew who converts is not subject to any of this. I want to be clear about that. It's not a racial thing. The Czar was not a racist. Perpetrator was not a racist. The opposite. All the Jews should become Russian and convert to Christianity, and then it'll be fine. Okay? Count Victor was married to a former Jew. Okay? You know, it's fine. But as long as you remain Jewish, that's just being stubborn on your own part. Because here I give you the way out, you don't take, that means that you're particularly evil. Now, as if this wasn't enough, they add a couple new laws a little bit later. In subsequent years, other discriminating laws are passed. Quotas were enacted limiting the number of Jews admitted to high schools and universities, percentage of general population. This is a big change. Under Alexander I, Nicholas I, and Alexander II, it was the opposite. They wanted to encourage Jews to go to college, university, high school, and the rest of it, to assimilate them, to Russify them. But then, you have a different point of view. All the doctors are going to be Jewish. All the lawyers are going to be Jewish. Too many Jews in the college class. They're getting the high grades. And I don't want them to become Russian, because if you remain Jewish without converting, and you can speak Russian and know the Russian language, then you're like a worse cancer. You understand what I'm saying? If you convert, that's okay. But if you don't convert, and you're a lawyer, and you're Jewish, that's a monster. And so from now on, if Jews are 3% of population, Jews are 3% of medical school, so to speak. Right? This legislation was revised in 1887. The administrative quotas were tightened 10% in schools within the Pale, 5% outside the Pale, except Moscow and Leningrad, which is 3%. Many towns, this resulted in half-empty schools. Number of potential students forbidden to enroll, and therefore you see the beginnings that we call a great exodus of Jews, like Chaim Weizmann, to go to Germany and Switzerland, a place like that, to get college education. Okay. Because you can't get an education in Russia. So you go to the West. Really dumb. Because what do all these people learn when they go to schools in Switzerland, Germany, France, all the other places? It's about freedom, democracy, all the rest of it. Everything we ain't getting in Russia. They get in Russia, when they come back, now this guy's a doctor over here. Now this guy's an engineer. Whatever. They're bringing back the bacillus of Western ideas, are they not? You understand? And so, this is what happens. I'm not done. Proportion of Jewish doctors in the army, 5%. Any Jewish lawyer wants to become a barrister, express consent of minister of justice, which you ain't going to get. The number one lawyer, what's the right word do we say? Appeals lawyer, what they call the Court of Cassation. Number one appeals lawyer in Russia was Grusenberg, a Jewish guy who would not convert. He wasn't from, he would not convert. He was defender bailiff. He was only allowed to practice in appeals courts. He couldn't be a lawyer any other way. You see? It's crazy. At the end of the reign, the right of Jews to sell alcohol was revoked. So all the Jewish liquor stores, boom, out of business. Okay? And what do? Drop dead. Wait a minute, you drop dead. At the end of 91, most Jews deported from Moscow, and a newly built synagogue was closed, headed by this and that and the other. 20,000 were expelled in the middle of winter, by the way. We call this the white pogrom. What they mean by that is it's not violent. It's on paper white. It's on paper. But the effects are those of a pogrom. It's the administrative pogrom. This becomes the official policy of Tsarist Russia. This is the stuff that you and I think about when we say, the Tsarist period, all the rest of it. Starts in 1881 as a reaction to the riots against the Jews. Wait a minute, the Jews were the victimized ones. No. The Jews were victimized, but they're the perpetrators. If you apply Talmudic analysis, you see, if you weren't there, it wouldn't have happened. Therefore, you're the Goyim, and therefore you're the one held responsible. That's the way of the Russian thinking. So, the rich Jews who live in St. Petersburg, the ones who were millionaires, and they go to the government, they go to the Czar, and they say, why don't you do something different? Let the Jews move into Russia proper. It'll be good for the economy of Russia itself. They won't be so crowded over here. They won't have to resort to, bars and things like this. They go in the regular kind of business and all the rest of it. What is the reply from Count Ignatieff to Baron Gunsberg? The door to the east is closed. Notice, we don't want to let you in Russia. But hint, the door to the west is open. Why don't you leave the country? Go west. Leave the country. So, Tsarist Russia is the opposite of communist Russia. There are no refuseniks in Tsarist Russia. It's the opposite. You want to leave? Vakasha. That's the big difference. You understand? The reason your parents and grandparents, there was no problem leaving the country. In fact, the government was happy about that. You understand? So, really, they're a bunch of monsters. As the Gemara says, Kachnun is this how you respond to victims of persecution? Kachnun is amikus. This is how you've been tortured and raped and burned and looted. The door to the west is open. What kind of cholera are you? I mean, at the human being level, you get what I'm saying? Just at the human being level. What kind of a thing is that? You're all beaten up, I'll leave town. With no pension, with no this, no, just go. Right? Now, the truth is, you and I know, actually, these moms did the Jews a big favor, did they not? Hit them with a gold brick. Sent to USA. This is when the Statue of Liberty was put up, the 1880s, early 80s. So just imagine, maybe it's your ancestors, just imagine, not mine, but yours, imagine getting out of this and coming to New York Harbor. It's a different world. You see? So they didn't mean to do them a favor, but they did them a favor. Because that's how 2 million Jews were saved out of Russia. Starting in 1881, down to the First World War, basically, or thereabouts. And they all ran away as a result of what I just described. Meaning, there weren't continual pogroms all through the 1880s, 90s, and all the rest of it. That you hear my parents ran away because of the pogroms, and my grandfather the pogroms. It's the white pogroms. It's the administrative stuff. It's the persecution. It's the crazy rules. And a smart person says like this, I'm going to go to a place called New York City. And there's no quota in the school over there. And not only is no quota in the school over there, if you learn in a place called New York City, believe it, in America, they have free elementary school. They even have free high school. They even have free college. True or not? In New York City, at State College. So you can think of the contrast. In Russia, you can't get into a middle school beyond 3%. In America, you can get your BA for free. And to be perfectly honest, graduate school is not that expensive in those days. I'm not saying everybody could afford it, but if you look at the prices of Harvard Law and all the rest of it, it's not what you think. Okay? But until Harvard Law, it's free if you make the grades. So if you're a Russian immigrant and you come to America, you may be messed over in the sweatshops, but you're going to make sure your kids do what? Get the grades. Okay? Because then it'll be all free. All you have to do is pay for the books. So they hit him with a gold brick, as I say before. Ignatieff, Alexander, and Papadonostev. It's not what they went, but it so happened that it turned out for the ones that ran away, at least from the perspective of the persecution. Whew. So, what's the result of all this? In July of 81, the pogroms started again. When the army this time fires on the rioters and started killing people, the army started taking things seriously. They said, the Jews are murdering this, kill the Jews. No, the army shot them. No, the Jews shot them. You see, once rumors start, you understand, get a life of his own. But the shooting does work. No pogromchik wants to get shot. Okay? Nobody's that kind of a hero. It's not worth it's not worth getting a TV set to get shot. You understand? Then the government sets up in August these what's called gubernia commissions, where each province, the gubernia, is supposed to set up an investigation. Now listen to this. This is the instructions of the government. The instructions of the government are like this. Each province is supposed to set up a commission to ascertain what did the Jews do wrong to cause the riots. That's the official, I kid you not, that is the official charge to the members of the commissions. What did the Jews do wrong to cause the riots? And each commission was all not Jewish, with one or two Jewish advisors who have no voting power. Look at the lousy business you're dealing with over here. Now, obviously, what do the reports issued by the gubernia commissions in August, September say? Well, the Jews did this wrong, and the Jews did that wrong. They exploit and cheat. Even the revolutionaries, who were supposed to be idealistic and believe brotherhood of man, even the revolutionaries blame the Jews because they don't want to appear to the public as they're Jew lovers. So much for the idealism. And the year ends in Warsaw, which is not in the Pale Settlement exactly, with a big riot on Christmas. Warsaw is a Catholic place, but the Russian police are in charge, and it happens. Okay? That ends the year 1881. What about the new year coming of 1882? The Jews, by January 1 of 1882, are sittering. Okay? And they realize the new emperor, who says, you know what the worst part about these pogroms? That we have to defend the Jew from the Christians. We got to do it. It's law and order. What can we do? This is what he said. He said the saddest part of the whole pogroms is we have to defend the Jews from the Christians. So it was real Czar Hatzarer. You understand? Now, by the way, knowing everything I just told you, you tell me what it's like in a Russian synagogue on Saturday morning when they make the prayer for the... Huh? You tell me what's going on there, okay? Now, by the way, there is a famous story of I think I wrote it up once. There was a guy, Tzvi Hirsch Masliansky, who was a famous darshan, you might say, a folks speaker. And he happened to be in a town in Russia, Yiddish speaker, a town in Russia when Alexander III died. He died of cancer and not an old age in 1894. And in Levadia Palace in the Crimea. And the Russian police commissioner of the town said like this: everybody has to have a sad eulogy for the Czar and all the rest of it. And he was in the town, so he was drafted. So he went to the synagogue, had to give the speech in Russian, and all the Russian officials are there. And he says, Rabbeinu Shalom, you know what the Tsar planned for us, how a great friend he was to all the Jewish people, and he was always thinking every day how to make things better. Now that he's in heaven, give him his full reward. Give it to him double and triple. And the police commissioner was obtuse. He said that was the best speech I heard. But the Jews knew what he was talking about. You understand? Now, in January 1882, the Jews are scared out of their mind. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector was the number one rabbi in Russian Empire. He said most influential, I would say, in Kovna. He proclaimed a fast. He said, there's a such thing called Yom Kippur Cotton, which is Erev Chodesh, which in the Jewish tradition, you don't see it today much, is a fast day. It's a Kabbalistic. You understand? I don't know many people that do it, but there's such a thing called fasting on Erev Rosh Chodesh. Case is called Yom Kippur Cotton. He said this year, because of the situation, he says I'm not ordering, but I'm going to fast Yom Kippur. So like 2 million Jews, all did across the country, and you have slichas and gathering across, and they're dominating their heads off, and they're going crazy. It's a very famous story that I always like to tell, because Shmari Levin was a leading Zionist. He became now from, but a very famous Zionist orator and thinker, and he wrote a very well-known autobiography in 3 volumes in English. And he talked about his mother growing up, and he said, every time it's a fast, you're fasting. You're young, you're skinny, it's bad for your health. Mama, what are you doing with this? And she said, are you trying to take away the only pleasure I have in life? It's a different world. We don't know who our grandmothers were. They're very pious. And to them, to join in a fast for Klal Yisrael and to cry your head off was a positive experience. We Americans, we're so spoiled. They're going to come Tisha B'Av, everybody goes, I can't do this, it's too long, all the rest of it. I get 10,000 emails, this, that, and the other. How can you make it the 2 hours without your coffee? Our ancestors were not like that. They were not like that. And the speeches were different at that time also, the old school drushes. Listen to this. When the preacher, that's him, who was no speaker at all, he was no orator, he wouldn't get a job in the soul. When the preacher, began to speak in a broken voice, the present position of Jewry, one long moan from one breast suddenly burst out the whole shul. So he says, "Oi!" And everybody started crying. Okay? Everybody wept. The young, the old, the long-robed paupers, the elegant dandies dressed in the latest fashion, the men in government service, the doctors, the students, not to speak of the women. For 2 or 3 minutes, this heart-rending moans resounded. This is our ancestors from long ago. That was considered a dominee. To have just a chazan and no garnish, This is a heart survey. The cry of common sorrow was issued from the Jewish heart. The rabbi was unable to continue. He stood in the pulpit, covered his face with his hands, and wept like a child, and a good time was had by all. Because this was a tinus. And saying, listen, they didn't know what's coming this year. Maybe they all got killed. They didn't know. You understand? Similar political demonstrations in the presence of Almighty were held in many cities. Some places had a 3-day fast. There is such a thing in the Shulchan Aruch. You don't have to, but it's well known in Halacha. There's such a thing called a 3-day fast. Have you heard of a woman named Esther? There is such a thing. And let me put it this way. If you're in Ukraine and scared out of your mind, it wouldn't surprise me. And everywhere the college youth, otherwise estranged from Judaism, took part in the national mourning, full of presentiment that it was destined to endure decades of sorrows. And this is very significant. I'll talk about that later. For the first time, the college youth, who are always going to the left and away from Judaism and towards assimilation and towards Russification, have a slap in the face. And they start to say, at the end of the day, maybe I'm really Jewish. Maybe I'm really Jewish. Anyway, 2 difficult questions face the Jews of Russia. Short term, long term. Short term, will there be pogroms in 1882, as there were in 1881? Long term, what are we supposed to do in this country? In order to find this out, stay tuned for next time. Good night.